Hey folks, this week Neal Gompa joins me and we talk about Fedora, the new 42 beta, the new KDE flagship news, Fedora on ARM and RISC-V, Asahi Linux, and more. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned. This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 826, recorded Tuesday, March 25th. Fedora 42's new flagship. It's time for FLOSS Weekly. That's the show about free, Libre, and open source software. I'm your host, Jonathan Bennett, and today we have, well, it's kind of a hark back to, I think, the very first pair of episodes that we did here under the new Hackaday flag. We interviewed, I think it was the first two, we interviewed Neal Gompa, and I touched base with him this week, and I said, hey, lots of stuff has happened at Fedora and at KDE and at Asahi, all these different things that he, and other places too, all these different places that he sort of has his fingers into that he works with. And he said, sure, we'll talk about it. It's been a long time, almost 2 years now, so let's do a recap, a revisit. And so I've got Mr. Neal Gompa here with us, and welcome to the show.
Hi, it's great. Like, hey, at least it wasn't another 10 years.
Yes. I think that was our joke when we did the a couple years ago when we did the episode. We'll have to wait 10 years to have you back. Well, we did not follow through on that one. We got you back sooner.
I'm fine with that. That's okay.
Yes, me too. So stuff's been happening. I'm trying to think about where to start, and maybe the most interesting immediate news is Fedora 42. The beta is now out, and that has sort of kept you busy, hasn't it?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's been a big release. Like, lots of things have been happening in there from a technical as well as non-technical perspective, and I've just been running myself ragged dealing with all the different things, along with everybody else who's working in Fedora KDE.
Now, remind us how do you fit into this? Like, what is your role at Fedora, at Red Hat ? At KDE?
No. I do not Red Hat things. I'm not a Red Hatter. There was the brief stint where I was in Red Hat as a salesperson. We talked about this in that first Hackaday episode. And that was it. I wasn't even in engineering. I was in sales.
Right.
Like, it doesn't... I am not a Red Hatter. It doesn't count. I don't do Red Hat things. No one ever construe anything I say for something that Red Hat does or wants or cares or anything of the sort.
Yep.
But
right.
within a Fedora context, right? So I am a member of the Fedora Engineering Steering Committee, which is elected in my election term, basically every spring, because I started with Fedora 32 and have been reelected every year since. And Fedora 32, by the way, was spring of 2020. So it's 5 years now.
That doesn't seem like 5 years ago, but okay.
No, it doesn't, but time hurts a little.
It's starting to, yes.
I am also the lead of Fedora KDE. I was previously co-chair rather than the sole chair, and before that I was a member of it, and I've been doing Fedora KDE stuff for going on 10 years now. I am also involved in Fedora Workstation, Fedora Cloud, Fedora Server, Python, Go, Rust, lots of different things in Fedora space from the development and engineering perspective.
Right.
I think the main thing we're here to talk about is kind of like my role within Fedora KDE and doing all the stuff around that. But I also, like, most recently, I helped mentor new people into Fedora to create their own special interest groups. Matthew Kosarak, who makes the Miracle window manager, a tiling window manager based on Mir. I helped him create the Miracle SIG and set up the Miracle window manager spin in Fedora 41.
Nice.
And then for Fedora 42, I mentored and assisted Ryan Brew to build out Fedora Cosmic, which is also part of this release.
Yes.
So there is that, and I also, helped people with like getting Fedora KDE Mobile and all this other stuff that happens. Like, so like, I think it's probably. Oh, and also Fedora LXQt I've kind of revived, and now that's for Fedora 42. That's Wayland using Miraway based on Mir as well. So I think like I have my fingers in a lot of pies in Fedora, is I think the way we wanted to put this.
Yes. So
and we didn't even talk about Asahi here, because where I created the Fedora Asahi SIG and
we'll get there.
Made Fedora Asahi Remix and all that other stuff.
We'll get there. That's an interesting story in and of itself. So there's something big with Fedora 42. Like we said, we just had the beta release. There's a big change with KDE and the workstation, like flagship, right? What's going on there?
So, historically speaking, since Fedora 21, we've had a rejiggering of how things have worked. So Fedora 21 was the first release where we had the change to have this concept of working groups with editions. And these editions are essentially top-level curated variants of Fedora that are promoted front and center. They are considered the flagships of the community. And we started with Fedora Workstation being the GNOME product, or GNOME Edition, and we had Fedora Server and Fedora Cloud. Later on, they added Atomic with CoreOS, replacing Atomic later, and then there was Fedora IoT added on top of that. And now we're adding Fedora KDE Plasma Desktop as an addition. And so the additions are essentially variants that are, in addition to being flagships, they're backed by what is known as a working group, which is a special team that has to report both to the Engineering Steering Committee, FESCO, as well as essentially being required to be part of the other organs of Fedora, like marketing and council for the top-level leadership and things like that. So these teams have extra responsibilities that they have to fulfill as part of being a top-level, team. So then below editions are spins, which is actually an ancient variant term that we've used since the beginning of introducing spins in Fedora 7. These are essentially deliverables, like media, curated collections that are done by teams within Fedora, usually special interest groups, that go in and take a collection of things that they care about and produce something to show off. So
you can download an ISO that has your preferred desktop environment in it.
Right. So Fedora KDE was the first live CD in Fedora. It was where the live CD stuff started. And there's many others now. Like, as I briefly mentioned earlier, there's Miracle Window Manager, there's Cosmic, but there's also LXQt, there's Sway, and much, much more, right? So I think there's 15 of them or something like that. There's a lot now. I have not counted. I guess if I go to the website and go look at the spins, let's see. So three columns and 1, 2, 3, 4. So 3 by 4, so 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm subtracting out automatically the fact that for some reason the website still shows the KDE desktop as a spin as well as an addition. But that's fine. It'll get everything eventually consistent is the way that this works.
Yes, eventually.
So there's 12 spins, and then labs are essentially you take a spin or an addition and you provide a workload opinion. So, for example, if you're an artist, you probably want the design suite, or if you're an audio enthusiast or a podcast producer, you probably want Jam. Yeah. These take an existing desktop edition or spin. For example, Jam takes KDE, Design Suite takes GNOME, and then Layers changes the application set and some of the default settings to optimize it for a particular workload. So, for example, for Jam, they changed some of the kernel settings to make it better for real-time audio,
right?
And things like that. And, of course, the applications are changed and things like that. So, for the labs, there's 3 by 3, and so it's 9, 10, 11 of them. So there's not that many, but the idea is that there is a way for a Fedora community contributor, if a group of people come together who want to do a particular type of solution, I think is the official word, to create a workload to express a workload type there's a path for them.
Can you mix and match the desktop that you want with the lab? Like, is there a way to say, I want an ISO that is Jam, but running on Cosmic?
Well, so not right now. Technically, you could install Cosmic and then install the what we call composition group, or comps groups for short, which actually describe the workload. And then you could just install it on top of an existing Cosmic one. So if you want to do audio production on Cosmic, by all means you can. You could install the software that is used on that spin, on that lab, and then put it on a Cosmic environment. Like that, there's nothing particularly nuts about being able to do that. But these are just like opinionated combinations that people have decided that they like and want to put together. And sometimes it makes natural sense. For example, a lot of multimedia production applications are Qt based, and they have integration with KDE, or they're from KDE.
Yeah.
And so it makes a lot of sense to pair that with a KDE desktop. It perplexes me that Design Suite is GNOME based as opposed to KDE based, given like half the software from KDE. But hey, I'm not in charge of Design Suite. If they want to switch to KDE, I'm happy to have that conversation. But like that is the idea is that the people that are working on this basically come up with how they want to express the workflow and for the workload.
Yeah,
but you can always mix and match yourself if you want.
With KDE and 42, what's the exact terminology? Is it Fedora Workstation KDE Plasma? Is that the title?
No. So the Workstation Working Group owns the workstation name within Fedora, and they wanted to represent the GNOME desktop.
Okay.
For a variety of reasons, this is how that is, and we've accepted it, and that's fine. So for Fedora 42, the edition is the Fedora KDE Plasma Desktop Edition. It is a mouthful, I know, but we get to have the word desktop in it, which is always important.
Yeah.
We have the word edition in it, which is even more important.
Yeah.
And we have the word KDE in it, which is awesome. KDE is the best. So, like, we want to be able to... And this has actually been beneficial to us because one of the things that we've taken a slightly different approach compared to some of the other editions is that we have done integrated cross-marketing between Fedora and KDE. So if you go to the KDE edition, KDE Plasma edition website on Fedora, you'll notice that the Learn More links across the page actually take you to brochure sites on the KDE website.
Nice.
To explain more about this stuff. I'm taking the approach of let's not do it all by myself, and let's kind of share this. And this was actually this website was actually helped put together by a member of the KDE Fedora community, Carl Schwann, who's one of the KDE artists that like puts together the websites and stuff for KDE.
Cool.
Actually helped make this, like basically wrote this website. Like I gave him some headlines and some pointers and did some review of it, but he basically wrote it for us, and I very much appreciate that he put in the time to make this work. Yeah. And it looks fantastic, I think.
Yeah, and so, I assume this kind of means that whenever Fedora has an official presence somewhere, like we were talking before the show about FOSDEM, or wherever it is, this means that the KDE Plasma Desktop Edition is sort of at the headline just as much as Workspace.
Workstation, yes.
Yes,
for sure. That is the goal, the plan, the hope. It may take a few reminders to make sure that we get all this straightened out. Like, I mean, this is brand new. This is the first time we have something like an edition that people can easily demonstrate. Coming that we need to start prioritizing in terms of marketing. But yes, like the idea is that in the breath where we talk about Fedora and Workstation, we should also be talking about KDE Plasma. The goal is to make them equal, because that is what they are at this point.
Yeah. I imagine that to sort of talk about them with a shorthand, do you just refer to them as Workstation and Desktop? Not officially.
I call it Fedora KDE and Fedora Workstation.
Okay, that works.
Because while yours is also accurate, I try not to upset people. I try to keep the peace. I know some people don't believe it, but I do in fact try to keep the peace.
Oh yes, I understand. Okay, something else I've wondered about with this is there is another distro out there that uses Fedora as sort of its testing and source. So Red Hat Enterprise Linux is in some ways a downstream of Fedora. Is the change that KDE is now a first-class citizen, is that going to get reflected, do you think, not speaking as you're not a Red Hatter, but just sort of, I guess, reading the tea leaves and what conversations you are aware of, is there going to be any change to Red Hat as a result of that? Or is Red Hat always going to be a GNOME-first distribution?
Red Hat doesn't have the staff right now to add a second desktop back into the portfolio. The desktop team hasn't, this is the first, I don't know if you noticed, but like for the first time in many, many years, Red Hat is hiring in the desktop team. They're hiring for GNOME people to work on GNOME stuff. I don't know whether this will eventually result in some kind of change on the Red Hat level to reintroduce KDE Plasma in Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Honestly, that's more of a conversation with Red Hat customers.
Sure.
If Red Hat customers start really pushing back and wanting to have KDE Plasma as their preferred desktop on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, then I'm sure that there will be a change. But as of right now, I don't see that happening. That being said, the immediate upstream for Red Hat Enterprise Linux is CentOS Stream.
Right. And
pretty much all the cool people in CentOS Stream use KDE Plasma. So if you look at, for example, CentOS Hyperscale and the alternative images, like KDE Plasma is a big part of those as well. Like CentOS Hyperscale has not yet put out its CentOS Stream 10 based deliverable, but as the one making those deliverables, I can tell you that KDE Plasma is very, very important to me. Right. And Troy Dawson, who works on Fedora KDE and supports KDE Plasma on enterprise Linux distributions in Fedora KDE. He makes the alternative images, and KDE Plasma is, a very important part of it for him.
Sure.
And so I think if you look at the community of people who actually use enterprise Linux in a way where they're part of developing the stuff and putting together things, I think you'll see a higher degree of KDE Plasma usage than you would expect. There are a lot of people, even within Red Hat, who are KDE fans, even if they're not in charge of the product.
Right.
KDE Plasma is very important to a lot of people, and it is a high-quality experience that deserves to be shown out more and commercially supported more than it is right now. So I'm just doing my part to make it better.
So in the realm of RHEL, there's nothing official, but one might say that there are some undercurrents that are at play.
Maybe. I can't say one way or the other because I don't know. Yeah. But if Red Hat customers start asking for KDE Plasma and keep seeing or keep deploying it and ignoring GNOME, maybe that will change. I don't know.
Yeah.
As it is, it was unthinkable 5 years ago that Red Hat would even provide any kind of engineering support for extra packages for enterprise Linux. And here we are now. They have 2 people on staff that help work on supporting EPEL and community people to work with RHEL people on making EPEL work out. So, that's Red Hat is culturally very slow. We've talked about this before, yes. That they're like this mishmash of the 80s and 90s cultures, right? And they haven't really taken in a whole lot of the newer community cultures. So it takes time.
Sure, that's fair. Let's get back to Fedora and looking at the Fedora 42 beta. Is there anything really exciting in there that you're just? So we talked about KDE becoming a flagship level, but other than that, is there anything in 42 that you're really excited about?
Oh, I mean, there's a bunch of good stuff in Fedora 42. Like, I mean, honestly, like the one of the cool things is that we now have with Fedora KDE specifically, out of the box, we have support for running x86 applications on ARM because we integrated the FX stuff from the Fedora Asahi people. You know, I say that as if they're separate people. It's all the same people. But like, you know, the stuff that we did for Fedora Asahi Remix in 41, we are bringing forward into 42 in Fedora KDE.
Right.
So if you're using Fedora KDE on ARM, you know, we have that stuff integrated so that it becomes a much easier experience. Another thing that I'm really excited about, I mean, from a user-facing point of view, is the stuff that we've done to introduce the Cosmic Spin, right? The Cosmic Spin is very exciting to me because the System 76 folks have done a lot of great work to build out a brand new ecosystem.
Yes.
People are not ballsy enough anymore to do stuff like that. And I'm very, very humbled and honored to have been part of help putting that together. And the folks that at System 76 working on Cosmic, I've met them in person multiple times now, and we've talked a lot about Fedora Cosmic, and they've been extremely helpful every step of the way. And they're very, very pleased with the progress we've made as well, supporting Cosmic and Fedora. And they really do want to see how it grows on its own. And they're very much more in the kind of spirit I have about open source, where I feel like where you're building all this stuff and doing all these things to create these, these things that are different, the different options, opinions. Like, people decry fragmentation, whatever, but like open source is all about you being able to do you.
Yes.
And if you can't do you, then like, what's the point?
Right,
like
right.
And Cosmic is a desktop that is made by people that embrace that philosophy. They are very, very happy to see Linux distributions adopt Cosmic. They are very happy to see Linux distributions adapt Cosmic. That's a very big deal. So like, this is in contrast with GNOME, which would generally prefer that you don't touch the GNOME experience. You keep it very close to what they're shipping upstream, and deviations are not welcome.
Right. GNOME has always been very opinionated.
Right. And Cosmic is opinionated too, but in many respects, they're more flexible. And their idea is, we want you to show us how you can make Cosmic awesome for you.
Yeah.
And I think that is a wonderful philosophy. It's basically the reason why I use KDE Plasma, is because this philosophy is built into it. Like, you look at what we have for the marketing material for Fedora KDE Plasma Desktop, and we call it the next generation personal desktop. And I mean it. The idea is, this is a desktop that you get to own. It is, if there's something you don't like about it, you can change it and make it more fit your needs.
I'm reminded of a conversation I had just the other day about the way HDR works, but we'll set that to the side for the moment.
I mean, okay, look, man. Sometimes sand doesn't work the way we want it to.
Just give me the slider.
But they're working on it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like it's,
And
this is all new stuff.
Yes. Yeah, and we could talk about HDR. I'll give everybody just a little bit of a background as to what I'm complaining about privately and what I was told, right? So like, I've got the OLED TV behind me, and my normal use case for that, it's a 4K, and I discovered very early on after getting that it splits up into 4 1080p windows very nicely, right? And so I end up using it like as if it were a 2x2 monitor grid. And there's a little plugin for KDE that lets you use keyboard shortcuts. Mudir is what it's called. Lets you use keyboard shortcuts to like full screen things and then put things full screen into these tiles. And so I use that a lot. And one of the things that I like to do, because it's HDR and there's now support for HDR in KDE, is I'll have like 3 places I'm actually working on stuff, and then I'll go grab an HDR video. Usually it's like a nighttime walk through some big city, and I'll throw it in the 4th quadrant. And I do not like the white windows being blindingly bright. And in KDE 6.2, there's a nice little slider where you can tone down the brightness of your SDR content and yet have your HDR content at full brightness. And for my particular use case, that is amazing, and they took it away in 6.3. And so I've gone and I've complained. And I was told, no, we're not going to add that back. But at the same time, I think it's Xaver, right? It's Xaver Huggle?
Xaver Huggle, yeah.
Xaver, okay, yeah. At the same time, though, like he listened, he understood what I was talking about, and I feel that there is, if enough of us go in and say, man, we really like this feature, like there's a possibility of getting it back. I've also contemplated a little bit, like, well, what would it take for me to patch my own KDE install, my own Plasma install, so that I can get the cool stuff in 6.3 and yet still have my slider back.
Yeah,
that's the kind of thing I love about Fedora, though, and KDE. Like, I can go in there and find the patch. Honestly, it wouldn't be that difficult to go and undo whatever they did in 6.3 and make it work the way I want it to, and then recompile my own Plasma packages. Like, that is not the hardest thing in the world to do.
Also, you could make an applet or an extension that does it, because I'm pretty sure the underlying settings still exists in Quinn, because you can manipulate all these settings using the tool Kscreen Doctor.
I went and looked in Kscreen Doctor and couldn't quite find it, but that's an interesting point that it might...
Well, Kscreen Doctor is terrible about documenting itself, so like there's that too. Like I wind up struggling figuring out how to use it because it doesn't have a man page and the help is dynamic, and it's like, and it will crash if you try to use it outside of the desktop running. So like it is, it's a very special application.
Yes. Yes, it is not intended necessarily for regular people to work with. I get that.
Yeah, but like essentially, it just talks to Quinn using the private interfaces. Yeah. But it is possible, if the underlying infrastructure still exists for the controls, there's no reason you couldn't make a Plasma applet or extension that does it.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I may have to look into that in all of my copious spare time with all of the other things on the to-do list.
All of us with our copious spare time can get so much done, right?
Yes. I've discovered, though, that I'm capable of a nearly infinite amount of work, so long as it's not the work that I'm supposed to be doing at a given time.
Oh, geez, I know. It's the same thing. It's so very hard.
Yes. Okay, so you guys did something kind of crazy. You brought Asahi in to KDE, or excuse me, to Fedora. I guess to KDE too, probably. What's the story with Fedora and Asahi? Fedora is kind of the flagship for Asahi now, isn't it?
Yep.
What happened there?
Well, I mean, so originally Hector Martin was working on this with Arch.
Yeah.
I had actually approached like near the beginning, just after the announcement on Christmas 2020, about working with him to produce a Fedora Asahi distribution.
Sure.
There wasn't enough stuff ready to be able to do it, so like
early days,
in very early days.
Yes.
But he made his original prototypes on Arch ARM, which is an unofficial derivative that rebuilds the Arch packages for ARM architectures. Arch, as a project, does not support ARM. So this was just one guy rebuilding everything for ARM because he wanted to.
Very Wildcat sort of approach.
Sure, and that's fine and all.
Sure.
The problem was that Asahi Alarm, as it was called, was not very stable and kind of broken a lot. I think the thing that popped his cork at the end was the fact that Firefox WebRTC was turned off because it was too hard to figure out how to make it work on ARM. At build time.
Yeah.
And so that's like, well, okay, now I can't video conference. I can't do any of my work job things.
Yeah.
This is not good. And I was still plugging away at Fedora Asahi, and I'd offered to him that, hey, you want to... I'm happy to like kind of essentially take over the distro part of this for you, so you can focus on all the rest of it. And I gave him an early prototype where I had things like kind of strewn together, and he was like, "This is already better than what I have with Arch Alarm." So the Asahi Alarm. So then we made the plans to switch to it. I started formalizing it. My partner in crime on this, Davide Kavalka, helped with getting all the infrastructure in place and putting the SIG together. And Essentially, we ported over a little bit of the things that came from Asahi Alarm to Fedora, and then the rest of it was all right. We just packaged the stuff and then put it together, and we created a new opinionated base integrating Fedora features into it. And I think we've had a really good relationship since then, because one of the things that has kind of happened since is that desktop Linux packages that are in ARM on Fedora are actually really getting used. And like there were fun surprises in the beginning where it turned out no one had ever actually used these on real computers, and they didn't work, and they would crash in bad ways because Apple Silicon CPUs, particularly the M2 and newer, had features that Fedora packages were built to use, such as pointer authentication and branch protection and all this other stuff that was enforced by the CPU. Well, it turned out no one had ever actually verified that those would work, and so these packages would just straight up crash when they were used. And it took, and these kinds of things are the inhibitors, the real inhibitors to being able to use another architecture as a daily driver for a desktop. Like if you don't have people actively using it and you don't have a platform that's performant enough for people to use, you're just not going to see these things get fixed. All of the things are theoretical until someone uses it. So, in many ways, this has allowed us to leapfrog. Fedora KDE has seriously benefited from it being the flagship variant for Fedora Asahi Remix. Because now ARM support in KDE is pretty much the best of all the open source desktops. And we have support for, some of the weird things that you do with ARM graphics and things like that pretty much none of the other desktops have. And because none of the other desktops have it, the experience is not as good. And some of those desktops just don't want to care about it, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. But KDE was perfectly happy to have us contribute and fix things and get things working. And so things like supporting HDR, making it a priority to handle high color depth and stuff like that. Those are important features that you need because the Apple platform pretty much mandates all of it.
If somebody wanted to have an ARM laptop or desktop, for that matter, to run KDE Fedora on, what's the go-to right now?
I wish there was a go-to right now. Right now, it's a rough world outside of Apple Silicon because, to put it bluntly, not many people care. Like you have Qualcomm with the X1 Extreme, right? The Windows on ARM devices that they released last year.
Right.
Those devices have the beginnings of Linux support, but they're not in a way that is usable. And this is in part because I don't know if I am not assured Qualcomm really cares about making this work.
Right. So for some devices, you get the what do they call it? Like server ready, where ARM has UEFI, and boy, that helps. That helps a lot to get boot working without having to go in and mess with device tree. Oh my goodness, I've lost so many hours of my life fighting with device tree.
I still lose hours fighting with device tree.
UEFI makes it a little bit better.
So it's UEFI with ACPI because what Qualcomm has done for Linux support for their devices is they've taken the worst road in the middle, which is UEFI with device tree.
Okay.
Which you can do now because ARM has made it a optional feature to have ACPI.
See.
Yep.
And
so System Ready now lets you validate a platform without ACPI support. And all the ARM embedded people are like, oh, but ACPI is terrible anyway. Device tree is awesome. It's like, as a person that has to ship something for generic hardware, as a software integrator, as an operating system vendor, device tree is the worst possible choice that you could have made for everyone. Because device tree is not standardized or specified. It's actually controlled by the Linux kernel project and changes based on what Linux kernel developers want. And that makes a ton of sense in the embedded place where no one cares about anything. But like once you get past that and you start talking about scale out long-lived devices that need to be updated continually, this breaks down fast.
Yes. It is not designed for consumers. It is built for developers, or kernel developers in particular, not for consumers. Yes, that is exactly what I found with Device Tree.
Yeah, it's a big problem. And like, so right now, if all current Windows on ARM devices have incomplete UEFI implementations and thus cannot boot as UEFI on Linux.
Oh, fine.
Yes. It is something that I have complained about, and is something that no one else seems to care about. So it is the current state of affairs. As far as a potential go-to device, Lenovo has actually been fairly good about their proof of concept, as they like to call it, work for supporting Linux on their Windows on ARM devices. So there is a couple of them that you could buy, where probably by the end of this year, you will be able to reasonably load Fedora KDE ARM on. The Lenovo ThinkPad T14S Snapdragon version, Gen 6, is one candidate.
Yeah.
And I think there's like a IdeaPad Slim that's being worked on as well. I think the Slim 7X or something like that has a Snapdragon version. And that one's also being worked on. Those two, and of course the ThinkPad X13S Snapdragon version. All three of those devices have varying degrees of you can do stuff with it. Because the firmware that is required for those things has been made available, so you have full hardware enablement. And combined with someone wrote device trees, it turns on and actually kind of works.
Yeah.
Performance, your mileage may vary, but between the difficulty of getting them set up, the middling performance of the socks in reality, there just isn't. I mean, the best of the go-to is still not great, but hey, it's an option, and we now have UEFI enabled live ISOs for ARM for Fedora KDE, as well as the raw disk images that you typically flash and you work with in the first for things like Raspberry Pis and whatever. So like, they're available. You can try. If someone is actually interested in driving this more, I am. Within Fedora KDE, we are very interested in making this work, but getting access to hardware is the difficult part, because they're not cheap and they are not fun to work with.
Don't hate me for this observation, but we're kind of in this weird place where we need Windows on ARM to do well enough for enough people to buy these, for the price to come down, for us to really be able to support Linux on ARM on them.
You're right, but I will also point out that even Windows is now making concessions for Qualcomm craziness.
Right.
Like, so the way that it works for Windows to boot is they have just enough ACPI for the NT boot environment to work, and then they use drivers to fill in the holes, essentially device tree style, on Windows to fill out the rest of the platform enablement. That means that these devices are effectively going to be orphaned as soon as Qualcomm stops caring about them.
Right.
Which is probably within 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
That's the real dangerous part about the way that things work right now with ARM, is that unless someone cares and has the ability to make things work, like, this is good. That stuff's going to turn into e-waste way faster than any x86 machine will.
Yeah.
Or even PowerPC machines. And device tree came from freaking open firmware. Like, and open firmware device trees are not this bad, because they're expected to be on the board. They're expected to. They have like restrictions on how they can be filled out. It's only on ARM and RISC-V where device tree is a mess, because it's controlled by the kernel rather than by a specification.
Yeah. Although to be fair, this is in some cases so this sort of flavor of thing is a problem on x86 sometimes too. I've got a desktop right over there that I'm working on for a local customer, and it needs a Windows 11 reinstall. Right?
Oh boy!
It's got some kind of proprietary NVMe thing in there that so Windows will not see the drive. I know it's there. Linux can see the drive, no problem. Windows will not see the drive, so it needs the driver installed during install time.
Yep.
That machine will not boot into recovery. it blue screens because it does not have the driver. It's like it's broken.
So back there's an HP desktop that I have, which has the opposite problem. The disk controller cannot be seen by Linux because it's sufficiently weird and not initialized properly by the BIOS. But Windows can see it because for some reason the Windows early boot stages sees the hardware differently than Linux does.
Yeah.
So, like, yes, this is not exclusive to those platforms, but I would argue the problem is far.
Oh yes.
It's far worse on ARM and RISC-V than it is on x86 and Power. Like, and speaking of Power, right? Like Fedora 42, KDE has now PowerPC support. And it's Power 9 and newer, basically. It's little endian Power. And, like, I'm sure most people don't care. But, like, hey, if you're one of those people that have a Talos workstation, hey, you can now run KDE on it.
Yeah, that's true. I guess there is Talos. I was going to ask whether there is any existing Power devices out there, but there is Talos. I'd forgotten about that.
I mean, in theory, you could also install it on IBM P series servers, but like, I don't know why you want to put Fedora KDE on a P series server.
Right.
But hey, you do you.
It's
like the whole reason SUSE added like remote desktop support to GNOME for GNOME Wayland was because people run GNOME on mainframes. Yeah. So like, people do some strange stuff.
Yep. Speaking of the KDE ARM Fedora experience, what about like the Raspberry Pi? I know it's not, well, you can make it into a laptop. In fact, I've got the Elocro CrowView, I think they call it, which is like a laptop form factor with ports to be able to slap a Pi into the side of it.
That's neat.
Yeah, it is. I've actually talked to them, and I said that when you make the version 2 of this, just give us the slot in the bottom to be able to slot the compute module into it. None of this popping it into the side. Just let me plug a compute module into it in the bottom. And
well, like, if the thing has like portage for like, the NVMEs and all the other things like in the enclosure, then the compute module makes sense. Otherwise, you might actually still want to use the standard form factor board.
Yeah.
I would think that I know nothing about this product. I'm literally hearing about it just now from you.
Let's see. Here it is. It's neat. It's the CrowView Note. That's what they call it. And so
it looks cool.
It is. It's neat, and it's literally just got USB-C for power. It's got an HDMI mini connection and a USB-A, and then they have this little carrier board. I literally just happen to have it here. It's this little carrier board that snaps in beside the Pi, and then the whole thing
and it ports over the interfaces.
Yes, and so the whole thing just kind of goes together like this. Which it's super cool that it works, but you have a laptop.
Super jank.
You have a laptop with a sidecar, right?
Yeah, it's a super jank setup, but it's so cool.
Exactly.
I think I agree with you that you'd probably want to use the compute module there, but I would also probably say that if they go the compute module route, they need to make sure that the main board actually exposes all the interfaces that the CM5 has. Like, for example, you probably want to be able to add NVMe storage.
Definitely want NVMe to make that work, yes.
You also probably want to plumb through the interface to plug in the Wi-Fi card. Because, right, if you're using the compute module, you no longer have built-in Wi-Fi.
I think some of them do. Pretty sure some of them do.
Wow. I am so out of touch with the Raspberry Pi people. Like, this is... Let's go look at their products. I'm just going to quickly... The compute module is... Oh, yeah. Wow. I'm impressed and horrified. But point is, right, that when you do it with the compute module, you got to do all the interfaces that are normally on the board itself.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, like the Raspberry Pi 4 is supported. The Raspberry Pi 5 is still being the work is still being upstreamed. My understanding is that the Raspberry Pi Foundation has paid SUSE to do the work. Okay. So eventually it will show up. And then we can do something with it. But right now we can't. But you can do it with the Pi 4. You could use the Raspberry Pi 400 computer and put it on there. Yeah. That's actually how I test on the for Fedora KDE on ARM, is because the Raspberry Pi 400 is easy to get. It has all the things. I don't have to fuss with it, and it's fine.
Yep. Yeah.
So that is probably the closest to a go-to ARM device I could give, is the Raspberry Pi 400 right now. which is depressing, But
I mean, it's a really cool, awesome device. But yes, that's less than ideal. Is it any better or any worse on Risk V?
So Risk V, I think there's been pluses or minuses with Risk V. One of the pluses for Risk V is that I think people have made it a point to not make the same mistake that ARM did and say that, ARM's mistake was they said that they're not the stewards of the ecosystem. It's not their job to make sure people that are integrating ARM IP do the good job of doing it. I think they've seen the folly of their ways, but it's too late for ARM to fix it.
Yeah.
For Risk V, I think people are trying to be better about this. There are far more products that use standard UEFI for Risk V now than there are for ARM today after 10 years of it. So that is a blow to the heart if I ever had any, if I ever said any, if I ever saw any.
Yeah.
From the perspective of, device trees and stuff like that, I think for a lot of the single board computers, they're still doing it this way because they're still doing the OpenSBI and they're doing the crazy jump route. But for example, the Milk 5, the Pioneer machine, is full on UEFI ACPI, so it works like a normal computer.
Yeah.
I think the Framework 13 Risk V board, while slow as balls, is actually a standard UEFI setup. So, I think we are seeing this mistake not being repeated as badly. Now, what is a problem right now is that Risk V chips themselves, their feature sets are fragmented.
Yes.
Because the instruction set architecture is a puzzle. And people have not... I think my understanding is that they have just agreed on how to baseline for Linux, just a couple months ago.
Yeah.
So it's so new that there's no hardware with that configuration. So
they need an Intel to say, this is the Pentium 2 feature set, and then everybody else.
There.
Right. There is no Intel in the well. I mean, Intel works with Risk V, but they're not doing this.
They're not pushing anything.
Right. They Intel uses Risk V internally. They don't necessarily tell anybody about it. They put it
everybody does.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of the point of it, right? All of your Intel chips have little Risk V cores in them. That's what runs the Intel management stuff.
Right, and so does the NVIDIA GPUs. They're all Risk V cores.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and same for Western Digital hard drives. The microcontrollers are all Risk V cores. Stuff like that. And I don't care about those things because they're not but they are endemic to the problem because there is no one who says, I care about this from a Gen Pop perspective, and I want PC experiences to work well, and I need Linux to actually not be crap on these platforms.
Yeah.
How do we do this?
What's the workflow look like for a regular person to do this install and use it as a daily driver?
Flash it to an SD card.
Yeah.
Right now, that's pretty much it. I mean, to be fair, right? Risk V in most distributions is brand spanking new. Nobody has any workflows. Nobody's built any tooling. No one's done any serious testing. Fedora is one of the early builders of Risk V. Fedora Risk V has been around for a while, just quietly in the background. And then, of course, there's Ubuntu Risk V and there's OpenSUSE Risk V. And these are all efforts that exist. Alma Linux is working on a Risk V build, and they'll be the first. My bet is they'll be the first enterprise Linux-based platform to have a Risk V offering, and that will change things because essentially hardware makers have to figure out how to work with the software vendors, because what happened with ARM was most of the ARM products for a long time were vertically integrated, and that's not what's happening with Risk V. Because the ecosystem is not vertically integrated, you are seeing much more collaboration on these fronts.
And so when we say vertically integrated, let's dive into for just a second about what we're talking about. So this is Google makes Android and makes a Pixel handset and is paying Qualcomm to make the specific CPU that goes in it. right? And so like they have control over the entire thing, and so they don't necessarily care about what gets upstream to the Linux kernel and what the experience is, because they control the whole thing, so they can just make it work for their platform.
Well, they don't have to. They don't have to care about a generic case. Is essentially what it boils down to.
Yeah.
Although to be clear, Google's actually one of the better Android handset manufacturers. They actually do upstream their platforms, and you can use them with standard Linux after you beat them to death a little bit. But like a better example probably would be like Motorola, Sony. Sure. Like the other Android manufacturers just don't do these things.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, man. We have been going for almost an hour here. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Well, I don't know. I mean, like, this was mostly, like, this was kind of spur of the moment, so I didn't exactly have a plan of things to talk about. But, like, I always enjoy coming on and talking, even though we've only done it twice and now thrice. So
yes.
Let's not make it take too long the next time.
Indeed. I did want to ask you about, I'm trying to go through my mental list, too. There's been sort of a shakeup recently with Asahi Linux.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And even some drama with Rust in the kernel. And I'm curious, one, what your take is on all that, and two, is that going to have an impact on the Fedora Asahi remix?
I'll answer the questions in reverse order because it's faster. It has no impact on Fedora Asahi remix because Fedora Asahi remix just chugs along, just doing the thing. I work on it, I take the patch sets, I build the kernel, and produce the images and push them all out. That all continues as it does now. So for the upstream components, Hector Martin essentially burned out, right? Like that's
he got tired of fighting the fight, and like that's understandable. That happens.
Yep. When it comes to Rust in the Linux kernel, it has always been contentious because that community doesn't churn a lot. So, like, one of the things I like to point out to people is it is very rare for someone to leave the Linux kernel project. And that is actually a bad thing. Because there is no churn, which means there is no fresh blood, which means there is no new leadership, which means there is no new ideas coming in very often. So this is actually the first, like, really new idea that has come into the Linux kernel in a long time.
Right.
And I mean, we're also talking about a kernel project that doesn't really use CI. They don't have good workflows for continuous testing and integration and delivery. Their code review style is painful to use because the modern internet does not really handle having tons of patches being sent as emails. And you have, these people that have been doing the same thing for a very long time, and things have, and they're all paid by their companies to just basically do the thing.
Yeah.
And they are in a position of which, if they disagree with their company, they can kind of do whatever they want.
Sure.
Because they have their pickings of places to go work.
Right.
And so things are relatively stale and stable up in terms of personalities, in terms of opinions and things like that. So that's the stage here. It's also like overwhelmingly paid people. Like there are very, very few hobbyists that work in the Linux kernel project these days. I believe that Greg Kroll-Hartman once said that like even back in 2003, it was like 89%. These and the churn rate from then to now is almost zero.
Right.
So, if in a 20-year time span you have all the same people doing all the same things in all the same ways, and nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Then you try to introduce change.
It's not surprising when you try to introduce a change, it's going to be sort of cataclysmic.
Yeah.
And cataclysmic is overselling it, but just to make the point.
Right. It is going to just be difficult, right? It's going to be a difficult process. The problem is that when you have a really old project who has really old opinions, who really doesn't get a lot of new people, and then you get a bunch of new people who are working in their free time to do something interesting that is kind of harkening back to the early days of how Linux was being built out, but they have different opinions of how to do things than you do.
Yep.
You're just in culture clashes everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
And to be clear, not everybody who works on Asahi Linux is a complete outsider in those things. Like, for example, Alyssa has been working in graphics drivers for decades at this point.
Yeah. And
she has very good experience working with both the kernel and the user space people on graphics. Jean Grenot has worked in multimedia for a long time and is a FFmpeg contributor. And FFmpeg is a very similar cultural mindset, warts and all. And, it kind of goes on. Like, it's not like these... And you have me, who exists in a lot of places, right? Like, so it's basically a story of burnout and the fact that, like, there's only so many fronts you can fight, and he tried to take them all on.
Yeah.
And it's just, you can read the story. He has written a blog post about it, and that's pretty much like I'm just happy it went well, the transition, because like it could have been different, and thankfully everything went fairly well as it has. Yeah. So there you go.
Hector stepped down. There are other people still at the Asahi project, and someone else has already stepped up and said, "Okay, I'm going to help maintain what's in the kernel."
Yep.
So it's gonna continue on, maybe a little bit slower with the loss of one or two of the people at the head, but
well, we don't know yet, because the current focus is now around upstreaming stuff rather than writing new. I mean, some new features are being made. Like, we just released microphone support for like just this past week, I think.
Yeah.
So, but we'll see how it goes, right? Like it's still early days in the transition. We've only made the change like a month ago, so we'll see.
Yep. All right, very cool. Let's see. I think about the only thing we have left is to ask you what your favorite text editor and scripting language is. Well,
it's still Python. But I now use Kate as my text editor for things now. I fell in love with being like... So I told you before that for simple stuff I tend to use Nano, and then for big programmatic stuff I use Emacs. But what I didn't tell you before was that in my original heritage of doing software development, I always used IDEs. Because big projects, I can't keep all the context in my head. I need a way to manage it. And Kate is actually a nice middle ground here. It has a language LSP support. It has many of the features that you would want in an IDE. It's very much like VS Code, except not written in Electron and actually fast.
Ouch.
And like, if I wanted a full-blown IDE, I could move up to Kdevelop, right? Like, so Kate has actually been really nice, and I've been using it for the past year or so for bigger projects, and I've been very happy with using it. So Kate is now my preferred editor of choice graphically, and I still use Nano for small things because I don't need the whole I don't need an IDE like experience when I'm just editing a file.
Sure. All right, if somebody wants to try out Fedora KDE, specifically say the 42 beta, where's the best place to go look for it?
KDE.fedoraproject.org. Super easy.
And if somebody wants to get involved with sort of the back-end tinkering, is that the same place, or where should
all that information is present on the brochure page at KDE.fedoraproject.org.
Yeah, very cool. And then there's various places like the Matrix chat room and all of that where people can come and hang out, ask questions, and bug you about features that are not there yet, and all of that good stuff.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes, there are.
I try to behave myself, but I've been lurking in that chat room for a very long time.
You're fine.
I've been on both sides of that equation, right? I have been the guy saying, man, it doesn't work, just fix it. And I've also been the guy saying, yes, we know it doesn't work, we're trying to fix it. Or this is the reason why we're not fixing that. I've been on both sides.
Yes. Empathy.
Yeah, it helps. All right, Neal, thank you so much for being here, man. It has been, once again, a joy and a pleasure to have you, and we appreciate the time.
Yeah, sure. And I'm happy to be on the show, and I'm happy to come back again in the future if you so desire.
Yep, we will definitely have to do it. I appreciate it. All right, so that was Neal Gompa talking about KDE in Fedora, and definitely I can recommend it. It's what's running on the machine behind me. It's not what's running on this one for reasons, mainly because this is this laptop shipped with Pop! OS, and so inertia kind of got me there. But it's what I run on the main desktop behind me. But we've got some fun stuff coming up in the future on Floss Weekly. So next week we're talking. The plan is to talk to one of the developers behind YT-DLP. That is one of the new YouTube downloader. And then the week after that, we're talking with Stefan about LXC, the Linux Containers Project. And then a couple weeks after that, we're working with someone from the Kunai Project, which is a Linux sort of, I don't think it's exactly an antivirus, but it's a Linux security project and platform, and definitely looking forward to that as well. We appreciate everybody that is here, that watches and listens, and whether you get us live or on the download, we will be back next week for another episode of Floss Weekly.